Good afternoon, this is Ruth Davidson here on Times Radio. And a woman in Hastings has won a national award for making museums more accessible to disabled and neurodivergent people. Esther Fox won the national awards for breaking barriers in museums and heritage sector, and her prize was presented to her by none other than the actor, writer and history lover, Tony Robinson. So I spoke to Tony and Esther earlier and started by asking Esther how it feels to have won the prize.
Well, I mean, it's fantastic. And I think, I was quite surprised to get the award, but I'm delighted. And it's just brilliant that our work, as you say, has been recognised and that people see the value of what we're doing. So, yeah, brilliant.
Well, Tony, you've been a long-standing proponent of making our nation's history as accessible as it can be for as many people as possible. You must be really pleased with the work that Esther's done.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it. I've specifically been working quite a lot the last few years trying to put over the case that our museums ought to be more accessible. I made a Channel 4 series last year. We wanted to demonstrate that museums should be for everybody, not just the few. And if you think about the way museums were created in the first place, they were mostly big civic buildings, weren't they, built in the 19th century, in which wealthy male explorers donated stuff that they had either purchased or looted in some foreign country. And the idea was that everybody should come in and see these wonderful things. But in fact, what happened more and more was that just a limited proportion of people came to see the things in the museums because they didn't really feel that they were about them. And what seems to have happened with museums over the last 20 years is the argument has been going, these museums need to be about everybody. Everybody ought to be able to see their lives on these walls. So what Esther has done as far as disabilities is concerned is fantastic. An awful lot of the finds in the exhibition that she's been creating actually were in the museum already, weren't they? But they were buried far away in old storerooms, and now we can see them again.
So Esther, in terms of it wasn't just people with disabilities, but also people who were perhaps deaf or were neurodivergent. What is it that you've been doing with some of the institutions that you've worked with to try and make sure that the stories are better told and they're told to a wider audience?
Yeah, so I mean, Curating for Change is really trying to tackle the underrepresentation of deaf, disabled and neurodivergent people in sort of two ways, really. So as Tony says, it's the stories, what are the museums telling in terms of our histories? Where are those collections that have been hidden before? But also, if you don't have disabled curators telling those stories, how can you do that in a sort of nuanced, authentic way? So it's very much been about tackling what's happening in the workforce. So why don't we see more deaf and disabled curators in roles? So our programme has worked with 20 museums across the country. We're in Hastings today, but we're spread as far as Liverpool, Leeds, Bristol, Kent. And we've been doing a placement programme for fellows. So we've had 8 fellows working within these museums for 18 months. And it's been really important that they're on paid work placements as well. So they are really valued as members of staff, and their expertise and time has been valued. And we've also had a shorter traineeship programme as well. So we've really been able to embed people's experiences within those curatorial teams.
In fact, the exhibition that we're in right now, that was curated by one of your disabled curators, wasn't it?
Yeah. So one of our fellows has put today's exhibition together. And as Tony said, when I first met with the museum, they said, whoa, we might have like one item that would be relevant in our collection. And today we've got a whole room full of stuff and really exciting stories, and stories that, as Tony said, you can see yourself reflected. You can see that disability isn't a modern phenomenon. We've been here as long as everybody else. And one of our other fellows is an Egyptologist. So, we're hearing about disabled people in ancient Egypt. So it's really about busting that myth that disabled people weren't part of society, because we always have been.
I think most people don't realise, Ruth, that a museum isn't just what you see. They've all got loads and loads of storerooms of stuff that they haven't got the space to show. And it's only by going back into those storerooms that you can suddenly think, blimey, this thing has never been on show, because people never realised it was a story. And so that revisiting always produces new and exciting things.
It's like an iceberg. The collection is only the tip that you see, and the other kind of 2/3 is below the surface.
Absolutely right. Absolutely.
And just lastly, Tony, before I let you go, in terms of encouraging more people to look again at their local museum, how would you make the pitch for that?
I think this is exactly what this project is doing. I think consistently museums ought to be looking to tell local stories that haven't been told before. And that isn't a criticism of the museums or the people who work in them. Realistically, virtually all of our museums are skint. They're really struggling to do what they've always thought of as their core projects. Well, two things. First of all, they've got to stretch the notion of what their core projects are. And secondly, I think we've all got to support them in any campaigns that they initiate to try and make sure they get a bit more money, so they've got a few more people on the ground.
Well, that's Tony Robinson there, and before that you heard from Esther Fox. Now, a retirement home in South East London has won the UK's leading architecture award. The John Morden Centre in Blackheath was praised by the Royal Institute of British Architects Stirling Prize for its use of sustainable materials. Alex Ely is the founding director of May, the company behind the building, and he joins me now. Alex, first of all, congratulations. How are you feeling?
Over the moon. Thank you very much. Yeah, absolutely delighted that this building's been recognised by the RIBA.
Now, in terms of the building itself, it's not like a home, a retirement centre in the sense that people live there. It's a day centre for older people, isn't it, in the community?
That's right. Although it sits within Morden College, which is the most wonderful almshouse and care home that was built 300 years ago. Founded by Sir John Morden as a charity, who set up a charity, and so the college does have residents. They're all in financial hardship and in housing need. Some of them have very particular care needs, and the John Morden Centre is really about creating a space where residents can come together and thrive. It has a health centre, it has art room, a theatre space, cafe. And it's about helping those residents live a really fulfilling later life.
Well, in terms of like you say, the charity that's behind it, it's been there when you say 300 years. There's a quote here from Daniel Defoe that it has on its website, the writer of Gulliver's Travels, saying, the writer of Robinson Crusoe, saying, it's the noblest of foundation, the most considerable single piece of charity that's ever been erected in England. So it really has had a great reputation all down the years. But in terms of, you've built a very modern building. What was it that they asked you to do? What was the specification they asked you to build to?
Well, a couple of things. First off, the building had to fulfil a purpose of being the sort of neighbourhood hub of the community here at Morden College. So it had very specific functions it had to accommodate, but also it had to be a low carbon building. So it's all built in wonderful material called cross-laminated timber. Buildings consume an enormous amount of material resource. They consume and emit carbon. They use a lot of energy typically. So the more we can use low carbon materials like cross-laminated timber, the better it is for the environment. It also has passive solutions that reduce its energy needs over the lifetime. So it naturally ventilates. It doesn't rely on mechanical ventilation. It really seamlessly integrates with landscape. So there's always this connection between indoors and out. And it's a really uplifting space to be.
And in terms of the materials that you've used, people will be listening might think, I mean, is that massively more expensive to use these sorts of eco-materials?
Not at all. In fact, we do a lot of social housing as a practice. That's most of our work, and a lot of social infrastructure. And so often the money is tight. You have to be very frugal and effective with money. So, for example, the cross-laminated timber that is the superstructure that's holding up the building, it's left exposed as a finish. It has a Remaimin. It's got a lovely green stem. 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 It's